All right, let's go ahead and get started. I'm so glad you guys are here today. We're talking about creating an IEP game plan for your next meeting. So for those of you who are new here, my name is Nicole Schlechter. I am an IEP mom. I'm an autism and ADHD mom of 4. I am an advocate also. I kind of got started in this a couple years back, but I'm a former educator and I have been sitting in IEP meetings on all sides of the table for over 10 years now. And I'm really passionate about educating parents on all things special education. So my oldest son has had an IEP since he was 3 years old. And being a former educator, back then when we initially started that process, I really thought that I understood special education. I understood IEPs. I knew most of the language. I understood the Iep Basics for the most part, but when we would go to those meetings, I'd be left sitting there thinking like, I don't really know what that means and what does that acronym stand for? And everybody was really nice and friendly and it sounded good. Like when they explained it to me, it sounded fine, but I was kind of thinking like, I have no idea if it is good or it isn't good, but it sounds good, so I'm going to agree to it. I'd ask questions about why we weren't doing something, and the team kind of had reasonable explanations for things. And so I kind of would drop it. I still wasn't sure. But before each meeting, I would really get stressed out. I wouldn't sleep. I'd feel anxious. And I really dreaded all of those meetings. Even though I was like really aware of what my son's struggles were and where those areas that he was struggling, I knew what they were. I mean, that's why we started the IEP process really early for him. But it is still really hard to hear all of those things that your team is saying about your child when we're going through present levels and we're talking about what they've accomplished and what we're still working on. We all live in those day-to-day struggles. So like this is just our life. And so when it's not very often that like we slow down and think like, oh my gosh, yeah, this is like really hard, right? Like we're stuck in the middle of it. And so yes, it's hard in the moment, but we're not thinking about the reality of these struggles. Sorry, I'm going ahead and muting people as they pop in here. But when the team would say those things that my kid was struggling with and those things that he wasn't doing the same as his peers, it was like facing reality over and over again for me. Like, this is really my life. This is really his life. And it was really hard to hear. And all of that really stressed me out. That part doesn't really go away. Years later, he's 11 now. We've been doing IEP stuff for a long time. It still stresses me out. But the rest of it, I've kind of simplified. I figured that out as I go along. I've gained a lot of experience working with families on a day-to-day basis with IEP meetings. And so those meetings for my kid are not as stressful as they used to be. So a few of the tips we're going to talk about tonight, they might be repeats for those of you who've been following me for a while, but it is just because they're really important. And so I really have to bring them up again. So what is an IEP game plan? It is exactly what it sounds like. It's just a fancy term for making sure you get all your ducks in a row before the meeting. It's kind of a template of sorts, things that you need to be prepared for your next IEP meeting. So if you guys registered for this workshop, which I think all of you have, that's why you have the link. I'm going to be sending out the actual template for you in the morning with the replay to this video for you to use as a reference. Before you put together the game plan though, please make sure that you guys have read your procedural safeguards. Everybody should be getting those at every meeting, or at least offered them at every meeting. And it's definitely a lengthy read, and it is absolutely overwhelming. But if you want to be prepared on all of the information thrown at you in the meeting, you really need to start with being familiar, becoming familiar with your parent rights. Again, you should be offered that or received a copy of it, of those procedural safeguards at every single meeting. If you haven't, I want you to minimize the screen and go email the school right now and get a copy of it so you can read. It is really just that important. procedural safeguards are like state-specific rights that you have as an IEP parent. And it can be really confusing. So I simplified and translated most of your parent rights inside of IEP Parent Academy. I'm not a lawyer. I cannot offer legal advice, but what I've done is kind of taken that information and consolidated it into some of the most important things, and then really simplified it and put it into everyday language. And I'm going to tell you more about IEP Parent Academy again in the end in a few minutes, but I want to talk a little bit about that game plan first. So first, play 1, review all of the data. The school will be coming to the meeting with evaluations, grade reports, classroom assessments, classroom observations. They're going to be updating, or at least they should be updating, present levels at every meeting. You need to review all of that data, but you also want to look at your own data. So look at all of that data that you've been collecting at home. Ask for a draft copy of all of that school data because you really do need to look at it. But you also want to look at all of the data that you have at home, those daily reports that you get from school, any kind of emails from the teacher, progress reports for annual IEP goals. Those are typically sent out around report card time. You want to be paying attention to that, like where are we making progress? Where are we struggling? Are we stalled on progress anywhere? Teacher notes in the report card is another really good area to kind of get information on what your teacher's opinion of your student's progress is. That can be something that is like really easily overlooked in meetings. But those teacher notes in the report card can be really important if you're looking for a specific type of information. For an example, I have a student who has autism, and he is really needing some social emotional support at school. He doesn't interact with his peers in an appropriate way. He is frequently struggling or feeling frustrated. Peers are frustrated with him. They're kind of arguing about things. He is not a flexible thinker. He doesn't have any friends, and he's in the 4th grade, and he wants friends, but he's struggling socially. The school is saying, well, we see him laughing at lunch, and we see him running on the playground, and he talks in groups, and yeah, he doesn't agree, but like all kids do that sort of thing. And they're really pushing back about offering him any kind of direct services for social emotional support. Well, what we did is when we looked at like the whole picture, and we looked at all of that data, and we looked at progress from after school care that's through the school, and we looked at past report cards. There were 3 report cards for 3 years prior that teachers had said that they would like to see him working on social skills and social interactions with his peers. So that was our leverage. I hate using that word, but like that was our leverage to getting him what he kind of needed. So those notes in the report card can be really important. But you're an equal IEP team member, and you have the opportunity to add your own data. So that stuff that you're looking at home to the IEP, and it can be added into present levels just like the rest of the team. But we want to be looking for like patterns of a struggle or challenges, and also looking for patterns of progress or lack of patterns for progress. Those types of things can be really important to bring to the team's attention, and add it into your parent concerns. Present levels, though, they should include positive data as well as data on those skills that we're still working on mastering. So we shouldn't only be talking about things that our child can't do. Nobody likes to hear all of those things that our kids can't do. So we should be talking about all of the things that they've accomplished, all of the progress that they made, so that we have a really good idea of exactly what they're capable of right now. So play number 2 is write your parent input statement. I feel kind of like a broken record when I say this, because you guys have all probably heard me say this a million times before, but I cannot stress enough how important this is. Your parent input statement is your turn to be the expert on your child. Everybody else goes around and I just tried to change the view on this. So I don't know if that messed everybody up. So sorry if it did. But your parent input statement, everybody goes around and they give their opinion or their data, what they think about your child, right? Like everybody goes around, they get their chance to say their thing at the table. They get their chance to be the expert. The entire table is filled with people who are experts in their field. Like this is what they do day in and day out. But you get a turn too because you're the only expert on your child. So the documentation of the parent input statement becomes a part of the legal IEP document. And should you ever need to take legal action, you're really going to want a record of your input and your concerns to look back on. Inside IEP Parent Academy, we're going to learn specifics on what needs to go into that parent input statement. I'm going to give you a template. I'm going to give you a sample for references. But if you haven't signed up, the parent input should be a short statement of your goals. We don't want it to be any more than a page, really, although sometimes if we do have a lot going on, it's hard to not have more than a page. Or if you talk a lot like I do, I have a really hard time getting my parent concern down to less a page because I have a lot of things to say. So, but we're going to talk about all of that. It should be your statement of your goals and your concerns for your child. And we want them to be as fact-based as possible. And I want you to reference any data that you have that can support your concerns or your requests for the school. One of my favorite things tools that I use or strategies that I use when I'm working with families is that I will screenshot the school's past data or prior IEPs or prior present levels or evaluations. I'll screenshot little pieces of it and add it to our parent concern level because in special education, data is like the number one thing. If you want something, you need to show the data to support that is something that you need. So I love using the school's data to show that what we're asking for is something that you guys have the data to show that there's a need for also. So play number 3 is prepare your questions ahead of time. I like paper and pencil. Like I write everything down in my little notebook anytime I talk to anybody, and then I have this is so funny. I have like a million Post-its, like they're all over my desk. So I'm a paper and pencil kind of gal. Maybe that's not you, but I like to print a physical copy of the IEP. I like to write my questions in the margin of the paper in a colored pen so that I can see it easily. I get really overwhelmed with all of the stuff on the page. So I will highlight or I will use a colored pen to kind of pull out those things that are important to me. But maybe creating a note on your phone works for you instead, or maybe you're typing in a Word document. It really doesn't matter, but I want you to be writing down those questions that you have as you're reviewing those draft documents and all of that data that we're looking at. I want you to write everything down so that you don't have to remember them in the moment because we're emotional in the moment because these are our children that we're talking about. And so it's hard to not be overwhelmed or forget something. And it doesn't matter how silly you feel about how silly the question is. Does that make sense? Like, it doesn't matter if you think the question is silly. Like, if you think it's a stupid question, it doesn't matter. Write it down, ask it in the meeting. If you're not sure what to ask, I've included in the IEP Parent Guide and inside IEP Parent Academy another giant list of questions that you can ask at your meeting. But questions like, how does everybody at the meeting know? Or what do you do to work with my child? Is important for you to understand so that you can know what these people's role is in your child's day. Another good question is, can you explain what you're seeing from my child that is different from his peers in the classroom? I get distracted every time I let somebody in. I need to really focus. I'm so sorry. But those are important too, because as a parent, you maybe don't have the age group of kids to compare your child to, right? Like you might have a friend with a kid the same age, and we try not to compare, but sometimes that comparison is really important. So if you can understand how your child's day is differing from the other students in the classroom, it can be really helpful for you to kind of understand where there's a need or where there's not a need or what's typical and what's not typical. And then another really good question is asking what your child's day is going to look like. And that question can be asked multiple times. Can you explain to me how social work services will look? Can you explain to me what occupational therapy will look like? Can you explain to me how you're going to implement this visual schedule? Like understanding what it looks like is helpful for you to really get a good picture of how they're using those kind of tools. But those kind of questions are really helpful for you to understand more in depth about what is being discussed at the table. So if you remember, all of these people who are sitting at the IEP table with you, they do this for a living. So sometimes good intentions or not, it is easy for them to skip over some of the things that seem obvious to them, but they aren't for you. So even if you feel like the question is silly, ask the question. It might be a silly question, but then you don't have to ask it again. So I think it's better to ask all of the questions than to not ask enough and feel unsure. Play number 4, and I know that this is going to sound really crazy, okay? But this is something that is helpful for me because I am not a confrontational person by nature. And as a parent, even if you're a special education professional, it can be intimidating to sit in a meeting with people who do this day in and day out, right? I want you guys to rehearse the difficult conversations that you think you might have in your head, or rehearse them with your husband or your best friend or the mailman, whoever you think is important or going to be unbiased and really help you out. We don't want a battle, so I don't want you guys to be anticipating difficult conversations, but sometimes we know that things probably aren't going to be super easy. We don't want a battle. Battling at the IEP table is going to lead to defensiveness and heightened emotions on all sides, and that leads to little collaboration with the team. We don't want that, right? But if you know that there's a possibility that things could get a little rocky, write down what you want to say and use those clarifying phrases like, so I hear what you're saying is, or can I recap what you're saying? Am I understanding this correctly? That sort of thing. And then if things get a little bit difficult and you want them to make a change or they want to make a change and you guys don't agree, asking to see the data to support those changes is another way that you can ask a clarifying question without like asking for a battle at the same time. So for example, if the school wants to reduce services for speech and you aren't in agreement, ask the team to show you the data to support that your child doesn't need speech any longer, or they don't need this kind of service, or that they need more support and the school or you don't think that they need more support, they need a placement change. Whatever that is, asking for the data to support that change gives you a better idea of what's going on. And sometimes schools want to make changes and there really isn't enough data or there isn't sufficient data. I worked with a team a couple years ago where they were trying to reduce services for social work, I believe it was. I don't even remember. And the data that they were basing it off of was like 2 weeks of data. They had this new, it was behavior intervention plan. They had this new support in the behavior intervention plan. And for 2 weeks, this child was like doing great, like had 100% every day for 2 weeks. And we met and they were like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. She's doing so wonderful. And I was like, okay, but like, hold your horses because it's only 2 weeks of data. Like that is not enough for us to make a decision on. And so that's a conversation that you have too. So like, it's great. She's making a lot of progress. I'm so proud of her. I'm so glad that we have something that we think is working, but 2 weeks is not enough data to support that she doesn't need something, or, 2 weeks is not enough time. So, but keep in mind also that you have emotional ties to this meeting and these requests and these changes because this is your child. But for everybody else at the table, this is just business. And I know that it's a hard thing when your emotions get involved, and you should be emotional to an extent when you're sitting at the table talking about your child. Like, it would be inappropriate if you had no emotion about that, right? Like, part of the reason that you are a good expert on your child is because you're emotionally connected to it. but these hard situations can really be hard to navigate. And so there is a training inside of IEP Parent Academy that is all about navigating tough situations. And then we're going to do a group training on that also, so that you are prepared to have the conversations and you know exactly what to say. And I'm going to give you the exact words so that you can write them down and you can just read off your paper and say these kind of clarifying questions so that it doesn't feel overwhelming. Play 5 is prioritize what you want out of this meeting. What 3 things are the most important things that you want to address in this meeting? And maybe it isn't 3 things, maybe it's 2 things, maybe it's 5 things, maybe there's a lot going on. But for many of us, we see this like bird's eye view of our kid, right? And we see all of these areas that they're struggling with. And we go to the table and we're like, we want this work done, and we have a concern about this, and we need more of this, and we need less of this, and we need to change this. And it all kind of gets lost in the shuffle. And then what happens is something that really isn't an important thing right now becomes a priority when something else was definitely more important. So what are the most important things that you want to accomplish or address in this meeting? What is the outcome that you're expecting? And then if you can't get those things, if it's a big ask and the team is saying no to you, where are you comfortable with a compromise? Because sometimes compromise has to happen on our end. I want you guys to be prepared to ask for something big, but know where you're comfortable compromising, because if we are prepared with a compromise, meetings go a lot easier than if you're asking for something big and it's like a non-negotiable. Sometimes things are non-negotiable. That kid that I was talking about that the school didn't want to give him any social emotional support, like non-negotiable. He absolutely 100% needed that service, and we would have a million meetings if that's what it took to get it for him. It didn't matter. He absolutely needed it. There was no compromise on it. He needed direct instruction to work on social emotional skills and social skills with his peers. But know where you're comfortable, knowing where you're comfortable with that compromise ahead of time, it allows you to feel less stressed at the meeting because you're prepared for what could happen. Sometimes going bigger than what you really want is a good way to get tough things done at the meeting. There was a student that I was working with, I've been working with them for a couple years now, and they wanted to like change his schedule from like a morning to an afternoon. And this is a kid who is autistic. He does not have any language skills, like any verbal language skills. He cannot attend to a task. Like he just has a lot of severe needs. And so that little bit of schedule change that made life easier for the school was completely inappropriate. And so I have a good friend who's in here with me. Her name's Wanda. She's an advocate too. And we talk about things all the time. And she was like, well, if they can't meet his needs, we're going to ask for something bigger, right? And I was like, you're totally right. And it was such a great tip, because sometimes even I need some help looking at all of the big picture. But Wanda and I talked about that, and I went to the school with the parent, and I said, listen, if you can't meet their needs, then we want him outplaced at a different school. And the school was like, whoa, like we're not there yet, because we really weren't there yet. But a lot of meetings later, because it did take us a couple, that student was kept in the classroom that he needed to be on, the schedule that he needed to be at. And it wasn't an issue long-term. And it was definitely what was in his better interest. So sometimes asking for something bigger than what you really want allows you to compromise for what you really need for your student. Maybe you want a goal changed a certain way though, but adding a new service is non-negotiable. Sometimes you have to prioritize those concerns and compromises so that you're ready at the table. If you know where the priority lies, like you know what the most important thing that you want to get out of this meeting is, your meeting is going to go a lot more smoothly, because you can focus the most energy on those important priorities rather than exhausting yourself arguing about every single little detail. Play number 6 is take your own notes at the meeting and compare them to the IEP notes after the meeting. if it isn't in writing, it did not happen. I say that to you guys all the time, but it is true. If it is not in writing, there is no documentation of it. And it's like a he said, she said sort of thing, and it might as well have never happened. So whether the team all agrees or not, everything gets written down. If you disagree with something that the team is saying, can you please put that in writing? If you agree with it, can you please put that in writing? It doesn't matter if we agree or not, everything goes down in writing. Sometimes we need to look back at those notes to really remember what was being discussed. So having your own notes that you're taking at the meeting is really helpful. But we also want to be reviewing those IEP notes after the meeting to compare with what the school's account of the meeting was and what was discussed and decided. Sometimes, well, I will say a lot of the time, there are variations and some discrepancies between what our notes are and what the school's notes are. And that doesn't necessarily mean the school's purposefully leaving stuff out, but like I can't imagine trying to take notes in a meeting with like 13 people and write everything down in real time and listen to all of these people talk, and it can be really difficult. So we want documentation of our discrepancies for our records too. So if you do notice any kind of discrepancy between your account and the school's account, we want to email the school as soon as possible and ask for clarification. And you don't have, again, we don't want to be confrontational. We want to just like ask a question, and we want to say like, hey, I took this note in the meeting and this was my understanding of what we agreed upon, but the notes don't reflect that. Can you clarify? That is a really simple thing. Another student I was recently working with wanted feeding therapy at school. He has some really significant food aversions, and even like playing with food is like too much for him. It's too advanced for what he's capable of. And the school was like really pushing back on that. But we did get them to agree to adding a feeding plan to the IEP. And it would be something that they were going to give him minutes on every single week. But they left it out of our IEP when we got the finalized IEP, and there was nowhere in the notes. And so I was like kind of feeling a little upset because like this was a really big deal. It was like a whole meeting just about feeding therapy, and it turned out that it was just accidentally left out, or maybe it wasn't accidentally left out. But when we clarified with them and I sent them something back and said, hey, can you clarify, we had this whole conversation about feeding and it's not in notes, they did have like a whole nother form that they had filled out, and they were like, you know what, my bad, we should have included that. I could totally understand that you were confused, and now it's included in all as well. So, but I know that there are a lot of you guys that have some questions about IEPs, and I'm going to go through and I'm going to answer your questions in a few minutes. But I know a lot of you aren't confident that the school is including everything that your child needs to be successful at school. I know that it's overwhelming, and sometimes it feels like everybody's speaking a different language, right? I see you guys trying to tell the team, and you guys are telling me what your child needs, but the school just sometimes doesn't seem to see what you see or know how to help. How many of you guys have heard, well, we don't see that at school, and then they don't provide the support that you need for your child, right? Like I hear that all the time. I sit in meetings like that all the time. Tomorrow, though, the doors are closing for IEP Parent Academy, and there are only 4 spots left for people to enroll. Years back when I was blindsided and overwhelmed before I got started in this journey as an advocate, I was sitting across the table from people who I thought were on my side. And I didn't ever want another parent to feel the way that I felt. I didn't want you guys to ever feel bullied at the table. And that's exactly how I felt. As a former educator, I really understood the language. I knew my rights. I'd read my procedural safeguards. I pretty much knew what to ask for, but I still felt really emotional and overwhelmed. And I second guessed myself at the table all the time. I would like nod my head and agree and smile because everybody was really nice and friendly. And I really didn't have a reason not to trust them. But then things changed, and our relationship changed, and the dynamic changed at the table. And the thing is that like, this wasn't, again, I've said this before, but like, this wasn't 100% the school's fault that I felt unsure or overwhelmed. For the most part, they were really doing a good job. Like they were answering my questions. They would offer support. I mean, they were sending home visual schedules when I needed them. But in that situation, I didn't know what I didn't know. And as a result, my son was traumatized by a situation that probably could have been prevented. It is nobody's fault, but it definitely could have looked a lot different for all of us and felt a lot different for my son had I known a little bit more, because I'm the only expert on the table on my son. That's the same for you. It is our job as parents to be prepared and feel confident about what we know about our child. And so that is something that I'm going to teach you and work with you on inside IEP Parent Academy. So over 4 weeks, we're going to be discussing all those IEP basics that you need to know. We're going to talk about your parent rights. We're going to talk about how to make the most impact as your child's advocate. And I'm going to be giving you those exact strategies that you need to use when things get tough at the table. Plus, I'm giving you a special education dictionary, which will help you learn like those exact terms and acronyms about special education. There are a million other supplemental supports and tools that you can add to your IEP toolkit that are going to be included in that course, including a whole big giant list of questions that you can ask at a meeting and questions that you can ask to your related services provider so that you don't have to come up with the questions, because it is really confusing sometimes to know what you should be asking. We're going to be talking about how to write goals, what makes a good goal, and I'm giving you a master list of accommodations for kids that are kind of divided up by area of need with a coordinating accommodation. Plus, when you guys sign up tonight or tomorrow, there is a bonus included that is a 4-part mini series about behavior at school. It is a short little series that will be included that's really just going to help you decode challenging behavior at school and change that outcome with the school from kind of a reactive outcome to a proactive one. So if you're tired of feeling, if you're tired of the school calling you and telling you that your kid's screwing up again, like I was, that is kind of where you're going to want that mini series for sure. So tomorrow the doors close, class starts Monday. I am really hoping that you guys are there. There are only 4 spots left. And I'm positive that it's going to sell out. There's still a bunch of people on the waiting list. It's definitely going to sell out. So I hope you guys are there. I'm going to go ahead and answer some questions for you. And then I will see some of you at IEP Parent Academy on Monday. Angel says, do you suggest recording the IEP meeting? Because it's very hard to be in tune with the meeting and taking notes. So if you feel like you're struggling with that, you can absolutely ask to record the meeting. In most states, you have to give the school 24-hour notice or more in order to be able to record that meeting. I typically recommend to clients, I don't like to record a meeting because I don't like to go back and listen to it, but I know that there are people that is like an effective method for them. So it's kind of a personal preference. But a lot of the times, if you're going to record the meeting, the school will want to bring their lawyer in to make sure that like everybody's saying what they're supposed to be saying, basically. And that isn't necessarily a scary thing. When the lawyers get brought in, that means that everybody's doing what they're doing their job. They're following the rules. So it can be intimidating for sure if a lawyer gets brought in. But because sometimes the lawyer does have to come if that's the district's policy, I like to tell parents that if you want to record, to give them more than 24-hour notice. Otherwise, your meeting has a chance of getting rescheduled. You said also that it's hard to be in tune with the meeting and taking notes. That is another good reason to bring somebody along with you. It doesn't have to be an advocate like me. It can be your friend or your neighbor or your mom or your husband. It doesn't matter, but like just bringing somebody there to be in charge of just taking notes is definitely a helpful thing for you to, manage all of that, because I can absolutely understand some of our kids have accommodations at school for note taking, right? If I had accommodations, it would probably be for like time management, because that's not my thing. But that is definitely a good opportunity to bring a different person, somebody else, a second set of ears that can really listen to things. And then that's also helpful to like after the meeting kind of bounce ideas off of them. Like, this is what I thought. What did you think? Or what did you understand from that conversation? Just like having that dialogue back and forth can be really helpful for parents also. Angela wants to know if she brings a lawyer, if the school brings one. It is really dependent on your relationship with the school. I will say that you don't need to bring a lawyer necessarily, but if the school tells you that they're going to bring a lawyer and it is for a reason other than you wanting to record, or you feel like you weren't prepared for that, and then they just kind of blindsided you with an email saying we're bringing a lawyer, I would definitely bring an advocate like myself or somebody else. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lawyer, but just somebody who is up to date and aware of what the law is, and more well versed in it maybe than you are as a parent, and somebody who isn't emotionally connected to the case can be helpful also. Because sometimes even bringing, a cousin who's a special education teacher or an aunt who's a special education teacher, those people are still emotionally connected. And so that can be a hard situation if we're all feeling like really emotionally charged at the meeting. So bringing somebody who's a little bit more more unbiased can be really helpful. And again, it doesn't have to be a lawyer. You can bring an advocate. I attend meetings with people nationwide all the time. So I had to get up at 6 a.m. the other day for a meeting. It was really early, which means that I got to be up even earlier than that. And I don't like mornings, so that wasn't fun for me. But the IEP meeting itself was fun. I enjoy other people's IEP meetings. So, so yeah. Okay, so tomorrow doors closed for IEP Parent Academy. If you guys need more information about that, please email me. Like I said, there's only 4 spots left as of an hour ago. I did have 6 spots this morning, so it will sell out. I hope that you guys are all there, and I will see you Monday, IEP Parent Academy. Have a good day.